Hello, wonderful humans. Welcome to this call, webinar, podcast. I can't decide what I want to call it, to be honest. Around conscious uncoupling, how to end a relationship with love and respect. If you haven't seen me before, this share came about because I went through a conscious uncoupling with my partner last year. It was about a year ago. And when I shared this publicly, a lot of people started asking me questions about the process that I used or we used and how it worked because it sounded really beautiful to them. And so I needed time to just be in my own process, but I wanted to get on and really share more openly and transparently than I did in my posts because I can talk more freely on video than with limited word counts, some of the experience that I went through. And so if you have not met me, hi, I'm Bree, and sacred intimacy is probably my biggest passion as well as embodiment. And so there's a lot I could say about those things, but what I will say is that for me, embodied intimacy is what helps us to create sacred intimacy. So I'm here to help men and women come into healthy love and respect for each other, which means appreciating the differences, what some people call polarity or duality, appreciating the differences between men and women and how we can work with those things to come into healthy union. So that's what I would term sacred intimacy, but also doing that in an embodied way. So embodied intimacy skills, learning how to use our body as a tool for feedback, which means we're working with the nervous system, we're working with attachment dynamics, we're working with healthy communication, healthy relating, we're working with breath and sound and movement and being responsible humans where we don't project our stuff onto everybody else. So that's a little introduction to me if we've not met before. So conscious uncoupling. I will reference this book. Yeah, hopefully you can see it. The light is not perfect in here. So it's called Conscious Uncoupling, 5 Steps to Living Happily Ever After. The author is Catherine Woodward Thomas. 3 words. So I bought this book 5+ years ago when I went through the biggest transition in my life in regards to relationships, which was when I separated from the man who is the father to my son. And I can't really talk about conscious uncoupling without mentioning it because that was where I first came to the book. And I read it and I asked him to do the process with me. And he wasn't really that interested, to be honest. And so I think this is worth acknowledging because some of you might love what I'm going to share, but you might also find that the other person doesn't want to do it with you. And so I want to acknowledge up front that you can do aspects of this with yourself, even if you have an unwilling participant on the other side. It's even more wonderful if you're both on the same page. And I've had that experience too, which I'm going to talk about. But at the end of the day, this was the thing that started it all for me. That said, there are people who train in conscious uncoupling, who are like uncoupling coaches, if that's the terminology, and they have followed this methodology. But to be transparent, I didn't necessarily follow this methodology, but it was the inspiration. And that's why I want to really acknowledge, the work that this author did. I read it, I integrated it, and then I did a lot of my own work. I did a lot of authentic relating to build skills around healthy communication. I did a lot of embodiment. I did a lot of somatic practices. I did all the things that I teach. And all of that started to meld together. So when I came to my next relationship closure ending after that one, there was a number of men that I had dynamics with until my last partner. Lovers is the term that I would use. And a couple of them, we did uncouplings as well. And they were much smaller, shorter relationships. But the process was very similar to what I'm going to explain, but also they were more willing than the first experience that I had mentioned. So I started to get opportunities where men were willing to engage in this process with me, which was really, really beautiful. and then my last partner. So we started our uncoupling process 12 months ago. Maybe it's 13 months ago now. And it was a 2-month process. So I'm going to talk you through that. And what was different about this for me, and I know for him, although I won't speak for him, extensively, but I know from what we talked about, this process was very different for both of us because it was deeply healing. And this is the thing, this is why I want to talk about this, because neither of us had the depth of healing in the closing of a relationship that we had when we went through this process together. So even just feel that in yourself, to be in partnership with someone, whether it's 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, 10 years, to be able to respectfully acknowledge the things that you cared about and appreciated and not part ways feeling bitter. And that is the underlying concept for me of conscious uncoupling. It's parting with love, parting with respect. It doesn't mean you still have to stay in communication, but you're not holding on to things from the relationship. And so it was incredibly deeply healing experience for me. And that's where I think it warrants talking about. The other reason I think it warrants talking about is a lot of people spend a lot of time when they first get into a relationship, at least if they're doing it well. Maybe not everybody's doing this, to be honest. But if we're doing it well, when we get into a relationship, we meet someone and we're like, hey, what do you want? Oh, I want this. I want that. Yay, we're on the same page. And we start to talk and we start to build dreams and we start to share things that we both want and what the relationship's going to look like. So there's this forming of the relationship stage. This can take anywhere from a couple of months, realistically, 2 to 3 months to really start to get to know each other, to even 6 months. Some people do it in a couple of weeks, but I wouldn't say we're going to go through to the same depths in 2 weeks. And so the reason I acknowledge this is it's like we're doing the same negotiating, getting to know each other. Are we a good fit? Are we on the same path? These kind of things at the tail end of the relationship. And this is for me what's so novel about this approach as well, is instead of just doing all this work at the beginning and then things end and then, now it feels like we have to just be in pain in the transition of whatever happens next. Spending time coming out in the same way that we spent time coming into connection, we spend time coming out of connection or unraveling the dynamic of whatever we've created, again, irrespective of the time that you were together. And so for me, that there's this beautiful acknowledgement of how important it is to close things in a way that is, it's not always perfect and it's certainly not pain-free. It still hurts, but it's healthy and it's communicated with care and respect and reverence for the dynamic that you had, regardless of how perfect it was. And so that's one of the reasons that I think relationship endings should be just as important as relationship beginnings. Just as important. And I know it's not something that a lot of people are talking about, but imagine if we all made the time to leave someone better off than we found them. To kind of fill their cup up with all the things we shared that were amazing, because you wouldn't have been together if there wasn't amazing things happening, hopefully. And to then part on good terms. And so that is why I think this is a really important conversation to have. And there may be more conversations over time about this. We'll see how long it takes me to get through. So looking at my notes, as I said, there is a 5-step process in that book, but I'm not going to refer to it because I essentially created my own. And that's what I'm going to take you through now. So when we first had the conversation about the relationship ending, the first thing was to take the time to be in clarity around that and what that meant to both of us. So the way that I would sum it up is to acknowledge the ending is here. Sometimes, we know things are happening. We know that things are not feeling good, or you're moving, or, it can be all sorts of reasons relationships end. Okay. But to actually have a clear conversation around this. So that's the first step, to have a clear conversation around it. And then as part of that, to acknowledge, what does this bring up for me? Like, I accept this. This is happening. I could be sad about it. I could be glad about it. I could be mad about it. I could be all sorts of things. But then letting the other person feel that. And so the first conversation that we had was very much like that. It was acknowledging the pain of the ending. I remember sitting on the couch together and we both held each other and we both cried. In different times, but we let each other acknowledge the sadness and the pain of love that was still there in this case. And again, that's not going to be the same in every context, but to let the other person know, I still care about you, even if we're not continuing. And there's sadness in me that you're not going to be in my life in the same way. These are the things that sometimes, more often than not, we don't speak, that are really important to be spoken, and why going through a process of making sure we do is really, really beautiful for both parties. So this is the first step, acknowledging the pain of the ending, or whatever the emotions are around the ending. How do I feel about this? What does this bring up for me? What am I now making up? I'm making up that I'll never meet someone as amazing as you. I'm making up that I'm going to be single forever. I'm making up that it's going to be hard. I'm making up that I'm going to miss all these things. Like, to really have these conversations and be honest. This is essentially a beautiful concept that authentic relating teaches, if you haven't come across that. Throughout this, there's times of one person sharing, the other person listening and witnessing, and then switching. But also the key thing throughout this whole process of uncoupling is keeping communication open. So if there's one rule that I would say that really worked well, it was we kept communication open the whole time. There was no, you can't talk about this, you can't say this, I don't want to hear that from you. It was, we're going to share with each other all of the things that we're feeling that we want to share. We're not holding back, because this is the reason for having a process to go through together, to let each other be part of it, versus, again, the traditional model of like split. Now you deal with your pain, I'll deal with mine, and we hope we never have to see each other again because it hurts too much. So we went through the pain together. And then we're able to heal aspects together, and then heal on our own as well. So the second step that we started to talk about on that first day was what happens next. And so step 2, I would say, was setting a container for how long we want to have to go through this process together. So if you've ever heard me talk about dynamics between men and women, something I often encourage the men to do, but anyone can do it, to set a container of time and space, logistics. And so how long do we want to be in this together? Some people might be like, oh, I only want to do this for 2 more weeks, and then I don't think I can stay in connection with you. It's too hard. And we agreed on 2 months. And again, if you think about the beginning and the ending and the relationship concept that I talk about, unless you were together for 2 weeks, 2 months is actually not a very long time for most relationships. And I've heard of couples taking longer in their uncoupling. Maybe they've been together for 5 years, 10 years, and they've uncoupled over 6 months or even a year, where they slowly start to live apart, slowly start to separate their lives. So while my brain says 2 months and thinks it probably sounds like a long, long time, And in moments it was also the right amount of time for the time that we'd been together. And it literally, we'd spent the first few months getting to know each other. So it felt about right to do the same at the tail end. So setting of the container was having this conversation around, what do you want now? What do I want now? What's going to support us to go through this process with love and care and respect, but also so that we can start to move forward as well. You don't want it to take 2 years, for example, unless that feels really right for everybody. And so what we talked about was, how do we communicate in this time? What do we need from each other? And at this point, it was very much trying to figure out the process, because we literally just created this as we went based on what felt good for both of us. And so if you are on the verge of an uncoupling now, I would encourage that you keep all these things in mind and be flexible, because the same things are not going to work for everyone. The process certainly can, but the time frames, for example, and what each partner needs is going to vary. Those specifics are very individual. But we talked about communication. For example, we talked about the fact that we still wanted to stay in regular communication. We still wanted to see each other on the weekends. We still wanted to sleep over at each other's houses for a period of time in that actually for the entire 2 months. We still saw each other almost every weekend. We talked about whether we wanted to physically still interact intimately, sexually. We talked about, was there any boundaries or restrictions on how much contact we had? And initially there was none. Initially it felt right to really continue as we had done, but acknowledge that there was a process of starting to come apart as opposed to pretending nothing was happening. And so what that meant was we both chose to still be physically intimate, because something that was really important for me, and I think for him too, but I'm going to speak for myself, was I really wanted to stay with my heart open in this process, to again not go through it and feel like, well, just because we're doing a conscious uncoupling process doesn't mean that I have to be happy all the time. I'm still in pain, but instead I chose to be in the pain and keep my heart open and let him feel that and let myself feel that and not push him away. And this is part of the difference. And so by choosing to stay in physical connection, because stopping that would have been really abrupt for both of us too, at the level of connection that we had, choosing to let that start to slow down organically in its own way. And so we continue to talk every day. We continue to start to share with each other. I'm missing you. This is hard. I'm sad today. I'm thinking about all these things. So in the first, beginning of the process, there was just a lot of these kind of conversations happening, honestly sharing what's happening for me, what's happening for you, being with our emotions and letting each other be privy to that. And we set an end date. As I said, we set a 2-month time frame with the intention that by the end of those 2 months, we would then officially close the relationship. And we would navigate and check in with each other every week throughout that process. Do you still want to do this? Is that too much? Do we need more time apart? So it was very much a lifetime interactive, play-by-play interaction between both of us. The third part that I would say that is the step that we started to implement, aside from keeping the communication open the whole time and not putting rules on what we could or couldn't say to each other for fear of upsetting each other, because that's not the point of the process. The point is to be transparent and honest and authentic and let each other feel everything, was to then express everything so nothing was left unsaid. So this is the third piece. How many times do we end relationships and then wish we had I wish I had told them that, or I wish I'd have asked them that question. And there's all these things that we're still sitting on, the unspoken things. So for me, a big part of this process was voicing the unspoken things. So we actually went through a process of creating time to go through some rituals, because rituals are something that I really, really value, to acknowledge different things and share different things with each other, including what we loved about our time together, what we loved about our relationship, what we loved and learned. What did you learn from this time together? What did you learn about yourself? What did you learn about what you need in a partnership? What did you find hard, or what would you have liked to have done differently? Are there things you regret? Are there any disappointments or things that you wish you had said looking back? And so we probably spent the biggest part of the 2 months doing that, coming together, sharing things regularly. I'm noticing this is coming up for me. I'm noticing I wish I had have done this differently, or I'm wondering if I had have done this, if the outcome would have been different, or I'm wondering if you need these things from me, or I'm wondering if I made this mistake that I made in a past relationship, or I'm wondering yada, 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 or I'm sad about this. I'm going to miss this part of you so much. There was definitely a lot of that. I'm going to miss this part. I'm really sad to be losing this experience. And to, again, not be afraid to share all of this, to let it be so clearly spoken that we were not having to read each other's minds, but also the things that we, wished that we could have done differently, even though they were really small things, because they're the things that often eat us up. And so my favorite part of this process was really acknowledging the things that we loved in each other. Because again, so often when we're in partnership with someone, we think they know. We think they know what we love about them, what we're grateful for, what our favorite things are. And unless we're really good communicators, a lot of the time that stuff goes unsaid. So actually sitting down and saying, these are all the things that I loved about being in relationship with you. These are all the things that no one has ever given me in other relationships, or these are the things about you that are so unique that I will always remember. And these are the things we did together that were so magical and special for me. And even as I say that, I feel the emotion of gratitude. And that's really what it's about for me, is being in the gratitude of, I'm so grateful for having this experience with you, and letting the other person feel that and hear that, and both sharing these things that we're grateful for, because every relationship has its gifts. They're all so different, but the biggest gift is to let the other person know that, and not just leave it in the corners of our mind where we think that was the most, that no one's ever given me this, and yet not being able to praise that person. And so there was a lot of that, a lot of praising each other for things that we loved and appreciated and valued and will miss. And the important thing I want to talk about with this part of the process, which again took most of the time because it would just be organically week after week, is that there was no blaming. Coming together and sharing is not ever about blaming. It's always about taking self-responsibility. And so that's the other key tenet that runs through this whole process for me. Open communication, self-responsibility. So if there was something that we wished that had have happened differently, it was taking time to reflect, which is definitely something that the book encourages. Reflect. What's my piece in this? How can I take responsibility for this thing that didn't happen, or this thing that I wanted that didn't get? And what could I have done differently, or what could I learn about myself? And then again, speaking those things. I noticed I wish we had have done these things together. I noticed that we got busy doing these things and we never went on that holiday that we talked about, or I'm sad about these, I'm disappointed about these parts of myself that I didn't bring as fully to the relationship as I would have liked. These kind of conversations are so healing because often we sense these things in each other, in our partners. We sense that there's something, but when it's spoken, there's a real freedom that comes to both of you. It's like you let each other go, but also there's that healing that comes through speaking it and being witnessed in it, and being witnessed in it by the person who is in it with you, not just a therapist or a friend who is going to have their own perspective, but the person you had those moments with. And so expressing all of the things. So there is nothing held back, even until the last day, even beyond, actually, that conversation still remains open in this relationship that I'm referring to. So we continue to come together, spend time together, talk about the things we were going to miss. There would be many times we would come together and we would feel really happy and grateful that we were in each other's lives and that we could do this in such a conscious, respectful way, but then also have moments of deep sadness of like, if we can do this so well, is it the right decision to not be together? And so I think this is important to acknowledge because it's not uncommon in a process that takes this amount of time to also doubt, is this the right decision? Even just if it's for a moment. Because it feels good to be witnessed and seen and to share so beautifully and honestly and vulnerably with someone who's willing to meet you in that. And that is where the healing really, really happens, where we get someone reflecting back our strengths, our gifts, the things they loved about us, the things they appreciated about us, and then we do the same. And how often do we take the time to do that? Again, without blaming, shaming, projecting. Projecting, if you haven't are not familiar with that term, is when we put all of the blame on someone else. We make it their fault. You did that. It's your fault this happened. That's exactly not what I mean by self-responsibility. The exact opposite. And so again, being really responsible that this is a process of recognition of the closing of the relationship. This is not a time to start blaming each other for shit that we wish had happened differently. It's a time to take responsibility for stuff that we wish had happened differently and having healthy conversations around that. And so sometimes acquiring those skills takes time, and sometimes you might even need a therapist or a guide to help you through that. We have the skills to do that, but I know not everybody will. So you're welcome to reach out if you need support with these things as well. So step 3, express everything, leave nothing unsaid. The fourth part was, which I mentioned already, but I've just kept it as a separate fourth aspect, was really making time to go through some symbolic closing. For me, I use the word ritual. You could use another word. It could be going for a walk to the place that you used to go together and knowing it's the last time you go there together. It could be going to your favorite restaurant and knowing it's the last time you'll ever eat together. That's a ritual of closing. It could be more symbolic. I'm not going to share the rituals we did because they're very personal, but you can create rituals in any way that you like, whether it is locations, as I said, dinner, the beach, holiday. It could be things like writing things down on a piece of paper and burning them, or having a symbolic letting go. All these kind of things help with the closure. And so having either small or big ways that you go through a process together or separate to acknowledge how you're letting go and what you're letting go of. And that again, that there's sadness in that and that it's okay. I know for me, every time we went through a number of rituals together in this process, every time that happened, there was deep gratitude and deep healing. There was love, there was there was tears and laughter and gratitude and all those things all mixed in together because we both kept our hearts so open that it was hard to feel anything except love and sadness that the love was going to go away at some point, but also gratitude that the love had been there that fully. And so, what I would say around that is making the time. A lot of this is about making the time to honor the connection, but making the time in some way that is symbolic to the two of you. And only you will know what those things are, whether it's one thing or multiple things, and how involved it needs to be. My rituals are quite elaborate. If you've ever been in my workshops, I like big symbolic things, but that's not for everyone. So you get to choose your own adventure here, as long as it is about that process of honoring, again, saying thank you, letting go of the things that you loved, letting go of the things that you appreciated. And even the other thing we did was we would start to slowly give each other things back, books. I found this in my cupboard, that's yours. So over time, as we were having these conversations about the things we loved, the things we appreciated, the things that we were sad about, the things we wish we'd done differently, keeping the communication open. Every now and then there'd be, oh, I found this and it's yours. And then that would bring sadness again. It's like, oh, here's one piece of me that is not yours anymore. And so all the way through those 2 months, there was these little moments of beauty, and it was totally bittersweet because there was so much gratitude and love there. And again, we would cry and hold each other a lot in the returning of these things because they were symbolic, like giving back a key, a house key. That was definitely a symbolic one. But there are many others. It could be a toothbrush in the bathroom. It could be something in your car. It could be their shirt in your cupboard. And so taking the time to, again, slowly pick up these loose ends as opposed to, separating and having these things and either giving them back later awkwardly or just not giving them back and throwing them in the bin. It's so much more beautiful and honoring to go through this process of like, this is yours and it's time for me to return it to you. And so feel the tenderness of this. It was and it is a really tender process when done with this heart open intention to remain in the love of honoring and appreciation so that we can both move back out into the world more full, sad, but more full, as opposed to beaten down, devastated, in total heartbreak. When it came to, the final time to close, we then talked about what do we do now? Do we want to keep the communication open a bit longer? Meaning, do we want to let each other stay in touch for another week, another 2 weeks, but not see each other physically? And so that also felt like a natural tapering off because we'd still been in physical contact, sleeping in the same bed, even though we started to reduce some of those things, there was still that slow untangling. And so at some point, reducing the physical contact, but then maintaining a little bit of phone contact seemed appropriate. And I think maybe that was a couple of weeks that we stayed in phone contact for a little while with the intention that there was also then a date where we agreed that we would then kind of stop communicating. And so what's important about this, I talked about the container earlier, it's the clarity. I think so often when there's an ending, we don't have these conversations to get clarity about what the other person is okay with and what we are okay with or what we need, even asking for what we need. So we can say, would it be okay with you if we just left it open to send each other a text every now and again over the next week or two, in case there's things I think about that I forgot, or I want to just say something to you. Would you be okay with just leaving the communication open a little bit? Versus then having this conflict inside of ourselves of, oh, I can't do that, or what are they going to think? And so having these conversations, I can't stress enough how it's not easy, but it's beneficial, because then you can both negotiate. And so we had set an end date with the intention that after that point, we would start to change our interactions to much less frequent, or just really let them take their own path. And so what I would like to say about that is, at some point, once you've finished the whole container of the uncoupling, whatever duration that is, I would highly recommend some time of no contact. And there's a lot of reasons for this, but I'll probably keep it simple. 3 months minimum. And that's purely for biological reasons. When we have sexual interactions with another human, we go through a bonding process. This is true for men and for women. It's different. For women, we're receiving a man into our body. And for a man, he's entering us. But there's still a fluid dynamic. Fluid, I mean, in terms of body fluids that happen in sexual interactions in a relationship. And the thing is, it takes time for our bodies to literally, this word might sound a bit hard, but to purge the other person out of our system. And it's about 3 months. And so that meant no voice messages, no texts, no communication of any kind, because even hearing the other person's voice can keep that connection alive. And so whether you're in a healthy uncoupling or a different kind of closure, I would really highly recommend trying to set a clear aspect of this, because we actually need this time to go into a cocoon, to be with ourselves and let ourselves then reset. And so, it was two months, but I then had extra 2 weeks of communication on the end, 2.5 months, and then just letting the communication pause for a little bit. There was a few logistical things we needed to leave open, but then there was a time where we said, we're going to go no communication for a minimum of 3 months. I think it ended up being longer than that. Was when we're both ready, one of us will reach out. But the 3 months is definitely something I would encourage that you agree upon, and you set an intention for that. So meant for, again, setting a container. We're not going to be in contact for this time. And anytime after that, if one of us wants to get in touch with the other, then we can. Are we both okay with that? And then letting the desire to reach out happen naturally. The thing is, once we've done all of this, we can then start to transition the relationship, if we want, which not everybody does, into a friendship or into an acquaintance or something else. Sometimes we want to stay in some kind of connection with someone. But if we are constantly in contact, even if we're uncoupling and then we still care about each other, but there's still sadness and missing each other, if we're still in contact, we don't get to go through that full process. So the no contact is actually really, really crucial, in my opinion. And for me, I went through some of the deepest, most challenging times in the time after we finished the uncoupling. The uncoupling, it was hard because there was the grief, there was the sadness, there was the joy, there was the gratitude. So there was this whole range of nearly always positive emotions, and then sad ones as well, which balanced everything out. It was like a cocktail of lots of different emotions. But we were in contact with each other. When we stopped communication, I definitely found that hard, because all of a sudden, even though I felt complete with the process, some part of me still needed time to be with myself and remember what life was like out of relationship with this person. And that's actually when deeper shadows in me came up, where I wanted to reach out, where I wanted to go and ask for a hug, where I started to feel lonely. And yet, this is where the deeper healing starts to happen for most of us. I'm sure you've all been through some kind of a relationship ending and feel like it maybe you went through a hard time, but then you rose. The difference with this was there wasn't hate, there wasn't blame, there wasn't all that negative, toxic stuff. It was just like, oh, this is hard. Because now, after all that beautiful sharing and reflecting and caring for each other, now I'm on my own and I need to hold myself through this. We're not leaning on each other and holding each other up like we did in the uncoupling. Now we need to deal with our part on our own. But that's adulting, right? It's adulting, it's necessary, it's helpful, and like I said, it's still painful. But the other thing that I want to say about this that was hard for me, this whole process, particularly when we were in the active uncoupling container, was the desire to pull away sometimes. So if you know anything about attachment, anxious avoidant, or the anxious avoidant combination, that plays out in most of our relationships. And so for me, I started to notice that there was times where I wanted more distance in the uncoupling. And yet my intention was to stay there, to stay available, and to keep my heart open. And so I had to fight these parts of me that wanted instinctively, because of all the times that had happened in the past, to push him away. And of course, it could be the opposite for many, many people, meaning wanting to pull them closer. And there was times that that happened too. But for me, that the deeper part of that process was also being willing to hold myself in that and to spend time doing my own emotional practices. And so the layer that's separate to the whole shared uncoupling process is emotional regulation and emotional release practices, which is something that I do with private clients and talk about in my workshops as well, which means when big emotions come up, how do we deal with them? How do we let ourselves feel the sadness, the grief, the anger, the rage that's usually at us? And so I would make time throughout this whole process to go and deal with my emotions, process them through my body, and then I would come back to him and share, oh, I'm noticing I'm missing you, and this is happening, and that is happening. So again, there was transparency, but it wasn't his responsibility to deal with my emotions. And this is an important distinction. We both did this. This is the part that's not easy, to not push your shit on the other person. And to also, if you want more distance, to not close and pull away. And so the whole process, in a sense, was a beautiful reflection of the time that we were together. So if you had challenges in a relationship and you go through an uncoupling, I can guarantee some of that shit will come up in the uncoupling, because it's a mirror. You can't escape it. So I'm maybe talking about all the beautiful things, but I do want to acknowledge that it wasn't easy, but it was worthwhile. I'm so glad I made that time for honoring, because of the healing that it gave me. The endings can be beautiful. As I mentioned briefly, I had done shorter uncouplings with men in the past. With my son's father, I did it all myself. I just did journaling and I did all these things on my own, in my own process, never shared anything with him because he didn't seem to want to know about it. Then with other men, I would go through little processes where we might spend a day or a week going through an uncoupling together, depending on the time we were together, and do simpler variations of what I've shared with you. But they were much more condensed versus this, which is certainly the longest, most complex uncoupling that I've ever been through. But again, it was so challenging but healing that my invitation is, if you want to have a next level relationship, this is necessary to get to that. This healing lays the foundation for the next relationship. So let that land. So often we're so eager to rush out the door versus just being willing to take a pause and be in the discomfort. And that's essentially what embodied practice is, being in the discomfort as much as the pleasure. Something else that I wanted to say. So those of you who are with me live, if you have any questions, would you like to pop them in the chat for me? Actually, I've covered everything in my notes. I know a lot of people who say that they've gone through uncouplings. It's quite a buzzword. You could say in the, I'm going to use conscious community. I don't even know what that is, but we all seem to have a sense of it for those of us who are in those spaces. So these are catchphrases. But my observation of everybody who's been through this process and called it conscious uncoupling is that they didn't do it to the depth that I've just described to you. They didn't do it with the honesty, the transparency, the commitment to each other's hearts and to loving and respecting the relationship that was before moving on. And that makes me sad because I feel like people are not doing a full service to what is a really beautiful process, but it takes commitment. And so if something that interests you, whether you are, on the verge of a breakup or thinking you might just want to know how it works for in the future, please understand it's not something to enter into lightly. But if you can do it with a full heart and ride out the challenges, just like being in a relationship, just a different version of it, it is incredibly rewarding. And I feel very content that there is so much completion in my heart around the love that we shared because we made the time to do that together. And that's not something that many people can say, but I think it's possible for everybody. We just have to be willing to put the work in. Questions. How did you manage the pain when one party moves faster than the other? Okay, great question. Thank you. So it was based on communication. The concept that I always come back to, this is a bit of a therapist approach, but it might be useful. We always go at the pace of the slower part. So if one person's wanting to go here and the other person's still, no, I'm not ready. If you've agreed to work together in this person needs to slow down. It's like, we don't try and force a child to ride a bike when they're still on training wheels and they're not confident. We be patient with them. We give them love. We give them reassurance. It's the same. So we have to move at the pace of the slowest part, meaning the part inside of the person who's feeling that. Or said differently, we go at the pace of the nervous system that needs the most support. And that could change moment to moment, day to day. But usually there'll be one partner who's slightly more on the anxious spectrum, who needs a little bit more time. And to fully honor the process, you go at the pace that they need. And that's hard for the person who's sitting over here. Full transparency. It is. But again, this is the commitment to the process. This is not about me getting my needs met and getting out the door as quickly as possible because I'm the person who wants that. It's about saying we've agreed to go through this process together, so we need to negotiate and check in with each other. And so that does require healthy, transparent communication as well. But being willing to go slower, if you're the person who moves faster, being willing to go slower than you always wanted, yeah, that's the deeper responsibility. And that's where self-management of our emotions becomes super, super important. Like for me, definitely there was times where I wanted to go faster and I found that hard. And so I would then need to go, hey, but this is, we have this time frame. This is what we agreed. This is right. I know in my heart this is right. Just because I'm feeling uncomfortable about it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with it. It just means some part of me wants to run away right now. So I would go and do my emotional processing about that. That is self-responsibility in my view. And then I could come back and go, whoop, yep, this is what's happening for me, but I'm still here. And then it would move. And then another level would open up of depth, gratitude, appreciation, sadness, whatever. So it would always come in waves because I continued to do my part and he continued to do his part. Hence, it's a constant evolution, self and other. What happens when one person is able to own and express, but the other person is unable to feel the positives and too stuck in their pain? Yeah, I mean, look, in theory, we generally tend to attract our mirrors in relationship. So sometimes they're mirrors of the same, and sometimes they're mirrors of contrast. This person has all the skills in this area, and this person have different skills in a different area. And that's the joy of relating. How do you manage that? By having open communication. So it might be being willing to say, I'm feeling frustrated that you're still in pain again. You know, I thought that I gave you what you needed and we spent time together and we shared the things we love, and I'm feeling frustrated that you're still finding this hard. That's honest. So being transparent about what you're feeling is what I would always encourage. I'm not saying that's going to feel nice for the other person, but this is the thing. This is just an extension of the dynamics that were playing out in the relationship. Guaranteed. That's just how it works. So this is the time to literally process that stuff by owning it respectfully. Not blaming them, not projecting on them, but saying, this is what's happening for me. I'm feeling frustrated that you need more time than I do. And I know that's just me and I'm going to go and deal with that. But I just want you to know that's what's happening for me. And then they can go, oh, yeah, you're right. And I'm sorry. I feel bad that I need more time than you, or I feel bad that I'm so sad and you're not. So these deeper conversations can happen if we literally bring it to the surface and let it be acknowledged. There is no other fix, in my opinion or experience, than literally having the honest conversation and seeing how that liberation of that often withheld expression starts to allow the deeper truth to emerge. And usually this process brings up a lot of shadows. I didn't talk about the shadow aspect, but it brings up all of the parts of us that we don't want to face, which is why I said that there was a lot of discomfort in it as much as there was joy. More joy than discomfort by a long way. But when the shadows came up, they came up hard. And that's these kind of things. It's like, I'm frustrated, you know, I want this, you want that. How do we figure this out? These are skills. And so doing it with someone that we care about and respect and already know a little bit about, this is how it lays foundations for our next relationship, because we really get the opportunity to work it out. Honesty versus blaming. So communication strategies are really, really a key part of that. So you could use frameworks like the authentic relating framework. This is what I'm noticing. This is what I'm noticing in me. Because that's not ever blaming. Like, I'm feeling that I'm frustrated about this. Blaming would be, why are you doing this to me? Why can't you give me more space? Versus, this is what's happening for me, and I'm noticing that I want to run away, or I'm noticing that I want to clothe, and I'm noticing I want to get angry with you, and I'm noticing I want to take it out on you. And so sometimes just speaking those things more often than not will take some of the tension out of the dynamic if the other person can try to hear that and receive that and not go into closure around it. These are advanced communication strategies, by the way. And yes, how the other person hears it and sees it is always important. And this is why at the very beginning, you need to lay some foundations around, okay, well, how do we communicate through this process? And what do we want to get out of this process? And how do we want to honor each other? And what are our rules around blaming, projection, dealing with emotions that aren't ours? And so I would suggest you kind of have some of those conversations right at the beginning, because it's better to have them when we're not triggered than when we are. The conversation will go easier. So the 3-month space is helpful. It's not set in stone. Yes, exactly. Yeah, honestly, biologically, it's something one of my teachers said, and I have found it to be true. Much less than that, even 2 months, it's just not enough. And I'm going to speak for myself as a woman. I can't speak for the men because I'm not one, but I suspect it's the same. Our yoni needs time to reset and replenish from having him and his body and his fluids inside of us, even if it's something as kissing, as fluid exchange. And so this leaves an energetic imprint. And if you believe the tantric philosophy, sexual engagement is a sacred energy exchange. Our energies are intertwined, our energetic fields, our auric fields, our biological fields. This takes time to reset. And so I'm not saying at the end of 3 months that you'll not feel a thing. But for me, once we'd done that, 2.5 months together, and then the 3 months of no communication, I was like, the 3 months is hard because of, that's when I started to feel lonely and other things for me. But once I came out of that, I was like, yeah, here I am. I'm back. This is the version of me that I always want to be. And I needed to go through that darkness first. And so this is the same thing as setting the container for how long the uncoupling is going to be, setting the container for the no communication is crucial, because we need the time that we need, even if we don't want to, even if we don't want to honor it. It's like, think about it differently. It can be an addiction. I mean, I'm going to honestly say there was times in that 3 months where I thought, oh my God, I want to have sex with him so bad. That was my body going through the process of purging him, like when we're addicted to some food and we crave it. I was craving him. I knew we weren't in relationship anymore. I didn't want to be in relationship anymore. I was emotionally happy with that decision. And yet my body was like, but that was, that experience was so good. I miss him in that way. So this is why I say it's biological, ladies. And again, I imagine there's a variation of this for the men. We have to set this space for ourselves, and we have to hold this line for ourselves, because no one else can do it. And if you cave, the clock starts again. So it's better to see the full 3 months out than to do the 2.5 and be like, I didn't quite make it. Trust me, it's worth it. Yeah. I think these things are not talked about enough, that we do go through states of physical, biological withdrawal. Whether it's I miss having the cuddles. I miss having this person to talk to who knows me so well. I miss the things they did for me and we did together. And so there can become this, even though we did this beautiful uncoupling, there was still this part of me that had to go through the reset of myself now as a single woman, and the void that left in my life after having a man who showed up for me so deeply. Big energetic adjustment. It was hard. So I also believe that in that 3-month process, it's my opinion, you don't have to agree with it. Don't go and have sex with someone else. because your body's still going through the detox. And all we're doing is layering more energetic, psychological, auric, biological imprints on that. We can't quit smoking and go and try smoking pot or something, like put something else in that's similar but different. It confuses the body. So this was what was right for me, to go through that 3 months of no communication and not to have sex with anyone else in that time, because I knew my body needed. I did yoni steaming. I did other things, but I can't remember what they were. I just went through my own rituals of cleansing my body back into my state of sovereignty, where it was not biologically connected to a man, because that leaves an imprint on us as women. And so giving yourself permission to go through this process. And so, for me, it's the full circle of this is now, what is it, 11, 13 months later? Is that what I said? Really feeling I've gone through that whole cycle and I'm better than I was. And that is the sign of a health, like us going through our pain, going into the darkness and descending in the journey of Anana, if you're familiar with that, and then re-rising more integrated. I know I'm more of the person that I want to be than I was 12 months ago when we started that uncoupling process. Not because I wasn't great then, but I've matured and I've gone through some shit that process put me through, and I faced parts of myself and I let parts of myself go because I was willing to do that work that most people are not willing to do when they just cut and run. So I know I'm acknowledging that it's not easy, but honestly, none of this is easy. If you want to have a deep, intimate, polarized relationship, these concepts are part of that. The self-responsibility, the honoring our own body, the checking in, the healthy communication, the going slow enough. These are all things. These are all things that I teach. Regaining my sovereignty in the 3 months. Oh, golly, what did I do? It's a good question. I think the main thing that I did consciously was I chose, and this is like a separate conversation, but I'll just mention it because I might do a call on it another time. I started to choose to honor myself as a feminine being and make that the priority. Instead of someone who was in partnership, I wanted to come back into self-sovereignty. And that meant giving and sharing my energy only with women. Not because I can't have men in my life, but because I knew I needed to heal. Not because I was in pain, but I just instinctively knew for the relationship that I now like am moving towards with the next person, I knew I needed a reset. And so I chose to spend time, aside from my son, who's a male teenager, I chose to spend time with female friends. I started going dancing again with women that I didn't maybe have as much time for when I was in a relationship. I would give myself more time to rest when I was bleeding, so that every time I bled, I felt parts of him coming out of my womb, letting parts of him wash away. And particularly the first couple of months, I seem to recall, feeling grief and sadness in my bleed because like there was aspects of him energetically that were still in my womb. And so then I did a yoni steam and again, spend more time with my women folk. That's the key thing that I would say. Going to the day spa for a hot and cold plunge, honoring myself through my dance practices, through my embodiment practices, through self-care, whether it's a face mask or going to the creek or doing some yoga or having a sleep in when I'm bleeding or going dancing, but literally choosing to only share my energy unless it was really important or maybe for business purposes. And I can do this because I work from home a lot, to literally limit my energy to be with women. And that was actually for more than 3 months. Even now, I'm still quite protective of who I share my energy with, because what I believe is that women, we nourish other women we fill each other up and we give permission for each other to be more of who we are when we're in healthy space with other women. But when we're in spaces with men, particularly if it's a platonic friendship or if there is an underlying current of attraction that's been not fully acted on, then we're still kind of in this dynamic. We can't fully go through our healing process. So I actually literally, it didn't engage. Whenever I went to a workshop, I only went to women's only events because I didn't want to interact with men in that 3-month period. That was part of the beginning of my, what is now a conscious celibacy journey of really purifying my body for the next man, and started by choosing to share my energy with women because it's actually more natural. If we go back historically, women spend a lot of time with women in villages and men spend a lot of time with men out hunting. And in our world, that gets a bit tainted. And I believe that really messes with the polarity dynamics that are quite naturally created, but we've kind of mutated them by mixing them up and spending time together all the time. And so I did that really consciously in that healing, and probably also just hung out with my son, like, let's watch a movie together. Let's snuggle on the couch when he wants to snuggle, if he does, which doesn't always happen. Let's go out for dinner together. Oh, yeah, I started taking myself out on dinner dates with him because, again, someone, my partner used to take me out. We'd go out for dinner, either the two or the three of us. And so I chose to start to hold myself in that dynamic because I didn't want another man giving me that. I wasn't ready. So I literally held that dynamic in my own life of stepping up and doing more of the housework and doing more of the practical things that a partner would often do, and giving myself permission to do that and still allowing myself to be with women. So you could say I was holding that masculine pole in my life more, but also giving myself space to really be in my feminine to balance that out. When we're in a relationship, one person's holding more of the masculine pole, one's holding more of the feminine, and that can change moment to moment, but usually we have a natural preference. I chose to give myself more of both, so because otherwise I would have collapsed if my masculine wasn't holding me up without a partner to do that. So that's maybe a bit of a tangent, but I hope that answers your question. Rituals, I don't know. I think the other ritual would probably be self-pleasure practice and de-armoring. And so the de-armoring, I probably didn't do a lot of de-armoring in the first 3 months because my body wasn't ready. And so if you choose to have that 3-month period of no communication, and you're really aroused, then going through a yoni de-armoring, you can go and do a hands-on session with someone who does yoni mapping, or you can do a yoni de-armoring yourself with a crystal wand at home, which is something that I teach, and I'm just about to take some women through in a beautiful group container of mine. And so that is a really wonderful way to also clear out the womb, the same as the yoni steam that I mentioned. And so the only thing around that I would say is don't set a schedule on it. Don't force it. I think I only did the de-armoring once in that 3 months because I just wasn't ready. I wasn't really feeling hugely erotic in that time because of the emotions I was moving through about feeling lonely and sad and other things. Now I've come out of that. I'm doing a lot of de-armoring because I'm back in the fullness of my aliveness, my erotic aliveness. And so I actively am de-armoring, but I'm not consciously de-armoring him out of my body as I would have done the first time that I entered myself after we were together. So there's quite a lot there. Forgive me for going around in circles a little bit. So I'm assuming I've answered all your questions. Thank you for joining me, and for everybody on the replay, thank you for being here. And if you have questions, please feel free to zip them through. As I said, I'm not qualified to teach conscious uncoupling. There are people who do that. But for me, this is an extension of everything that I teach and everything that I do in my life. It was a natural process that came about because of all the things that I'd already done and worked on and developed and matured in myself. And that's why I felt it would be nice to share, because I think the more of us who can take the time to heal our relationships with love, with care, with respect, the better the world will be. And that also means not talking ill of someone we're not in relationship with anymore. So I guess what I want to finish on is that, I made a big decision when my son's father and I split up, that I would not bitch about him, complain about him, nag about him to our son, because that puts him in the middle. But for me, that's an extension of this process of consciously uncoupling. It's like that is for us to deal with as adults. It is not for us to deal with the child, but it's the same even if you don't have children. We bitch about someone to our friends behind their back who we're not with anymore. That means there's something unresolved there. That's what it says to me. And that's why doing these processes and facing our shadows and our discomforts and really owning it is really powerful, and it's hard. There's been many times where I've struggled to bite my tongue over my son's father because of all the time we were together for such a long time, and to not say that to my son. But I feel like that is me choosing to hold respect for our relationship and not taint it beyond that time. And so I hope that that gives you some inspiration, however you want to take that forward, whether it's with children, whether it's not. The intention is really the same. Love, respect, healthy honoring. Even if you never want to see each other again, you don't have to do that, but you can still walk away knowing that what you shared was beautiful, and you don't have to continue beyond that. Everyone gets to choose their own adventure, and everyone's process of uncoupling is going to look a little bit different. So thank you again. Please reach out if you have questions, if you'd like to get some support with private work. As women, I work with women one-on-one, I work with couples, and I have workshops and group programs and resources and things. So if I can help you with anything, please get in touch. Thank you to the ladies who joined me live for your fabulous questions, and sending you all lots of love.